Hey everyone, welcome to episode 6 of The Echo Chamber. This is a podcast where we talk about all of the books in depth that we have covered over on the YouTube channels, whether it be Echo Worm, that's worm spelt with an I, or our daily upload channel, which this is airing on live on YouTube at Echo Worm Audiobooks. If you are unfamiliar and you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we do audiobook readings over on YouTube. We also do them on Patreon at patreon.com/echoworm, again, worm with an I, or you can find us over on Vimeo by searching for Echo Worm. But this podcast is one where we take all of the books that we've covered on the channels or on our Patreon and Vimeo pages, and we go a little more in depth. Now, for the first 5 episodes, we have covered so far the first 13 chapters of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Today, we are covering the final 4 chapters. We're kind of bunching it all into one big episode. It might be a little longer than usual. Typically, they're about 25 to 45 minutes. This one might edge a little longer. We'll find out. But I do apologize for being late. Usually these are out every other Thursday, and this week I am a few days behind for a fairly good reason. I ripped my meniscus in half, and so it's kind of been a painful, very busy week for me. But today we're going to talk about the ending 4 chapters of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So with that being said, there are significant spoilers coming up as we get later into the podcast. If you've never read this book before, if you have no idea what's coming up at the final couple chapters here, there are major spoilers for this book. So if that's not something you're interested in, feel free to pause this and come back to it later. You can read it along with us, like I said, over on Patreon and Vimeo, where we have an audiobook recording of both the British version and the American version of this book. But without further ado, let's hop in and start by picking up where we left off with chapter 13. So if you'll recall, Hagrid reveals the secret of the Sorcerer's Stone. We finally know what is hidden in the castle. We know who Nicholas Flamel is. We know what he's created. We assume that is what's hidden inside the castle, is the Sorcerer's Stone, which is a stone which allows a user to live forever, to make gold, essentially. It's kind of an all-alchemist tool, a get-rich-quick scheme, and a live-forever type of deal. So whoever is after the stone is essentially looking after riches and eternal life. So we start with chapter 14. Now, chapter 14 is what I would probably refer to as a pace killer. If you've never read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone before, or Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, this chapter comes at a very weird spot in the book. It sets up the future chapters very well at the end, but it kind of kills the momentum that has happened in the previous several chapters. This chapter is titled Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. And the whole plot of this, you'll be familiar with this if you've seen the film. I know I mentioned if you've seen the film a lot in this podcast. But in the films, it fits a little better because all of a sudden there's this dragon that pops up. And they get caught with it. And then it kind of disappears. It's not super well written, but the pacing of the chapter is a lot better in the film than it is in the book. In the book, what happens is we're approaching Easter. So we're end of March, early April here at Hogwarts. This is 1992 now. And as the exams are starting to kind of come up, Hagrid runs into the group in the library. Now, of course, their last interaction was Hagrid accidentally revealing who Nicholas Flamel is. And as soon as he arrives, they start throwing questions at him about the Sorcerer's Stone and how much he knows, because they have kind of forced his hand previously and made him reveal too much information. And they think that if they can bully him into giving them information, or bully him into giving them information, he will do so. In this case, he doesn't really reveal anything, but he says that if they come down to his hut later, he has something to show them. So the kids get all excited, right? Because they've already gotten information from Hagrid. They think they're going to get more information from Hagrid. And he's just invited them down to his hut after hours. So after school that day, the kids go down to Hagrid's hut. And inside the hut has nothing to do with the Sorcerer's Stone. It's a dragon egg. And this is where the pace starts to kind of die. See, in the film, he shows them the egg, and then it hatches, and they get caught with the dragon. Now, like I said, there's really no plot ending to this. Like, it's kind of a loose plot point that's never really picked up. In this chapter, it's the opposite. We learn everything about this dragon, and it takes forever to get to the end of this story. This chapter just throws a dragon in for no reason, and the whole chapter is resolving this issue of Hagrid's got a dragon. It's illegal to have a dragon, first and foremost. How are we going to get rid of it? So Hagrid shows them his dragon egg. The dragon egg hatches. Hagrid names it Norbert. It is a Norwegian ridgeback dragon, and dragons are illegal to own in the wizarding world, unless you are like Ron's brother works with dragons over in a dragon preserve in Romania. They're very wild creatures. I believe it's a top level. I know they're all categorized in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I believe this is a level 5 creature, which are the most dangerous possible creatures to both wizards and muggles. Dragons exist in the world in very, very rare places. They are not legal to own by any means. But Hagrid, of course, as we learn later on in the series, is obsessed with fantastic beasts and wild creatures. And so he finds a dragon, and the way he finds the dragon, or the way he gets the dragon egg, is fairly suspicious. He admits to being fairly intoxicated in the nearby town of Hogsmeade, and having played a game of cards with a fellow who he didn't ever see the face of. He reveals the secret of Fluffy to this person for the exchange of a dragon egg. So this person basically gives Hagrid a dragon egg in exchange for information about Fluffy, the beast, three-headed dog that is guarding the Sorcerer's Stone, they believe. So it's a little odd, and Hagrid doesn't seem to put together that all of this is very odd. But the children know that he has to get rid of the dragon because dragons are illegal. It's going to cause a lot of harm. We learn later on in the second book, of course, Hagrid has a history of having creatures that he's really not supposed to have. This becomes a trend later on in the series. But because Ron has the connection to dragons with his brother Charlie, they kind of come up with this plan throughout the chapter to get rid of Norbert by sending him off to Charlie's brother. And so this is where things kind of divulge from the film. They get caught with the dragon egg in the film, but in the book here, we get the entire chapter after the dragon hatches, where it's basically just destroying Hagrid's hut from the inside. And one night they decide to get rid of it. So they call Charlie. Charlie's busy doing his stuff, so he sends a couple of his co-workers, and they come and pick up the dragon from the tallest tower in Hogwarts. Now, in canon, this is technically the astronomy tower. It's never quite revealed if that is the case here, but they do refer to it as the tallest tower of the castle. So try to imagine that this is the same place as the astronomy tower, like we will talk about later on in the series. Some very important events happen at the astronomy tower later on in the series. But they take the invisibility cloak, they go up to the tower, they give Norbert away to Charlie's friends, they head off to Romania with Norbert, and the kids descend the stairs of the tower. And they get about halfway down and they realize that they forgot to put the cloak back on. They took the cloak off to say hi to Charlie's coworkers. And as they're coming down the staircase, they realize that they've forgotten to put the cloak back on. And who's waiting at the base of the stairs? Argus Filch, the caretaker. So this is where things return to the plot of the film, right? So they finally get caught. The reason they're caught is because Malfoy saw them sneaking out. So Malfoy turns them into Filch, and eventually that sets us up for chapter 15. So like I said, the pacing is significantly different than it is in the film. And every time I read this book, I forget how long this chapter is and how nothing happens in this chapter. But it does set up the next chapters very nicely moving forward. So that's where we're at with chapter 14. Moving on then to chapter 15. This is where we move into the woods. This is the Forbidden Forest. So just like in the film, they are caught by Filch, and they are drug off to Professor McGonagall's office. She condemns them for sneaking out after hours. It's against the rules. But also, Malfoy, who turned them in, gets in trouble for essentially turning them in by being out after hours. And so he is furious. He tries to pull the "you don't know who my dad is" card. Of course, we learn later on in the series that his father, a very rich man, is on the board of governors. And so Malfoy really tries to pull the wealth card, the social status card, but it doesn't work. And so Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Malfoy are all sent back to Hagrid's hut to spend detention. And this doesn't happen immediately. This is where it also kind of breaks up from the film. It doesn't happen immediately like it does in the film. The film, they get caught after hours, and their punishment is to stay out later after hours by going into the forest with Hagrid. It's a scheduled detention later on. Of course, Harry loses momentum with the Quidditch team because he has to do this detention. And eventually he overhears a conversation where Quirrell, who previously he had caught Snape talking to Quirrell in the Forbidden Forest. This time, Harry is walking past, I believe it's the teacher's room, the staff room at Hogwarts, and he hears Quirrell talking to himself, or talking to someone. It sounds like he's talking aloud to someone. And when Harry goes to investigate, there's no one there. And so he gets a little suspicious of this. He's kind of weirded out by it. He's still suspicious of Snape. But eventually, detention comes. And so they are trekked out to the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid, and they're going to find unicorns. Now, a lot has happened in the forest, kind of foreshadowed throughout the book, where something is happening to the unicorns in the forest. And in this chapter, as they're going to hunt the unicorn, or to find the unicorn that's being hunted necessarily, they learn about unicorn blood and its value. So, as you'll note in the film, it's explained that unicorn blood, if it's drank, you know the word I'm trying to say, if it is ingested by a wizard, it has the ability to extend someone's life. But it's very similar to something like the apple in the Chronicles of Narnia, the first couple books of Chronicles of Narnia. It's like the forbidden fruit, right? Where once you taste it, it basically poisons everything else that you ever taste. You will never be satisfied. You will always be longing for this. It's like an extreme drug addiction. It is one thing that, sure, it has very, very positive short-term consequences for you, but the long-term effects are detrimental to both your mental health and your physical health. It will slowly start to kill you the less you have of it once you have already had it. And so unicorns are being hunted in the Forbidden Forest, and they go out, and the groups kind of separate. So Harry and Hermione go with Hagrid, and Neville and Malfoy go together. And then they find the unicorn, and this is where Harry and Malfoy are together when this happens. I do apologize. I think I mentioned earlier that Ron is a part of... I'm trying to remember here, because Neville is with them. So all five of them go together. I think I mixed up Neville and Ron earlier. I do apologize. But anyways, Harry is with Malfoy during this scenario. And they find a unicorn. And over the unicorn is this mysterious masked figure. And you'll be familiar, like I said, with the film, with this scene. The creature kind of in the cloak, stalking them across the ground. It almost slithers like a snake. And it's very, very interesting imagery that is shown in this scene. And as soon as Harry arrives on the scene, his scar begins to hurt. And this creature comes after him. And all of a sudden, he is rescued by a centaur. And they come across centaurs earlier in this chapter. And it's not super important. They're just kind of... They have this bizarre sense of talking where they talk about how Mars is bright tonight. And they're talking about the stars and astrology and all of this stuff. And Hagrid kind of shrugs them off because it's almost played for laughs. But it's... The tone of it is also a little, like, mysterious and almost foreboding horror type thing. It's a unique interaction. I don't really know how to describe it better than that if you've never read the book. But Hagrid doesn't really think much of the centaurs and their ability to see the future. But Harry is rescued by one. And taken back to Hagrid on the back of this centaur. And we see some interesting dynamics between the different centaur herds, because the one that rescues him, I've always used the name Ferenz. I know some people say Ferenzi or Ferenze. But the one that rescues Harry and brings him back to Hagrid allows him to ride on his back. And when he comes in contact with the others in his herd, they are very, very against this. And so there's kind of this weird civil war dynamic between the different centaurs. We see this dynamic reemerge later on in the series when Ferenz takes a job at Hogwarts. I won't spoil which job he takes eventually, but of course Ferenz comes eventually to work at Hogwarts, and this decision to leave his herd basically makes him an outcast. He's already kind of an outsider, but they really don't like the way that he interacts with humans. And so we see this kind of foreshadowed here too as well. But Harry believes that the figure that attacked him, or the figure that he was saved from, is in fact Voldemort coming back from the dead, using the unicorn blood to resuscitate his life's essence, essentially. And he's partially true in that. Of course, we later learn that there is another piece to this puzzle that we're not quite sure what's going on with. Of course, Harry is very suspicious of Snape, and Snape's motivations, and believes Snape is going after the Philosopher's Stone. But this is really where we start to think that Voldemort is actually involved with this, because Harry believes that that is what the figure was. And so this is how we end the chapter, believing that the Dark Lord has returned, is sustaining himself on unicorn blood, and is now after the final piece of his puzzle at getting resurrected life with the stone hidden inside Hogwarts. And that's where we end chapter 15. So 15 picks things up a lot better. I very much enjoy this chapter. The comedy is very fun in this chapter. The tone of this chapter is very, very good at setting up the future of just kind of the end of the book here. But then we go into chapter 16. And this is the penultimate chapter. This is called Through the Trap Door. So we come back in, and then there's kind of a lull because we need to kind of extend the time period. We were at this Easter, kind of early April area, and now we have to move our way all the way into the end of May and going on into June. So they're very suspicious of Voldemort. They're very suspicious of Snape. Harry has this foreboding feeling from the centaurs. And then we go to chapter 16. And so finals have come and gone. And as a celebration, Hagrid invites the kids back down to his hut. And then, this is where Hagrid reveals kind of the extra secret of when he was in the club, playing cards with this hooded figure, and he was revealing information about Fluffy. He revealed to the other figure how to get past Fluffy, and reveals this to Harry here by playing music to him. And Harry freaks out because he realizes that this hooded figure, who Hagrid never saw the face of, fits the description of the hooded figure that he saw in the woods. Starts to believe that it's the Dark Lord return, and so the kids rush off from Hagrid's hut, go into the castle, and try to find Dumbledore to tell him that someone is after the stone, and it's going to happen very, very soon. Dumbledore's gone. They run into McGonagall, who tells them that Dumbledore was hauled off to the Ministry of Magic in London. He got an urgent letter. We later learn that this is very likely a fake. Dumbledore really didn't call ahead, which is interesting. So there are a couple different theories about why Dumbledore, A, got this letter, B, didn't check if it was authentic, and C, decided then to actually leave the castle. And the biggest fan theory about what's going on here is Dumbledore knows that there isn't a ton of danger in the situation that's about to arise, despite the fact that the Dark Lord could be, in fact, returning and going after this very, very significant artifact. Dumbledore believes there are enough precautions involved where nothing is going to happen to Harry or his friends or even the stone, and is using this as an opportunity to test them and to see where their hearts lie, essentially. This is just a fan theory. I don't know if there's any truth to it, but it does kind of bridge this explanation of why did Dumbledore leave the castle when he's supposed to be the one kind of keeping an eye on the Sorcerer's Stone. But Dumbledore's gone. And so because of that, Harry believes that time is running out on A, Voldemort's ability to find the stone, B, Snape's ability to grab it for Voldemort, if that is in fact what's going on, and C, to stop those pair together, these kids having to go off and do it. So they decide that tonight is the night that they're going to do it. They're going to go and stop Snape or Voldemort or whoever is going after the Sorcerer's Stone from getting there, because they believe it's happening that night. So they go find Fluffy again. They're back with the old beast. And Harry, Hermione, and Ron realize that the music is already playing. Someone has already been there before them. And I want to back up because I did skip over something very, very significant here. We've been talking about the three, the trio in the Harry Potter series, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. But we have also kind of tangentially talked about Neville, because Neville finds himself wrapped up in this story a lot more than you would expect, especially based on the films. They tend to leave Neville's character out of his involvement in the books, especially in this first book. Neville is very, very much involved in a lot of these situations. And so, right before they're about to go rescue the stone, whatever, find Fluffy, as they're leaving the Gryffindor common room, this is where we get the scene where Neville is waiting for them and tries to stop them. And this comes up from an earlier interaction we talked about in either last episode or the episode before, where Neville was attacked by Draco Malfoy, and Ron basically told him he needed to stand up for himself. And so this is Neville standing up for himself against Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And he actually says this to Ron, and Ron says, well, I didn't mean us. Like, I didn't mean you need to stand up to us. We're your friends. And that's, of course, where we get the excellent line later on from Dumbledore about it takes a lot of courage to stand up to one's enemies. It takes even more courage to stand up to one's friends. So Neville stands up to the three of them, and Hermione knocks him out with a spell. And then they go to Fluffy, and then they notice that there's already music playing, and someone's already been there before. And as soon as they arrive, the music starts to stop, and the music starts to disappear, and Fluffy starts to wake up. We see this in the film, of course. In the film, they don't actually do anything to solve this. They just jump down the trapdoor before they can get caught. In the book, Harry plays a flute, learns a song that Hagrid had taught him earlier in the book, and jumps down into the trapdoor. This is where it picks up very similar to the film. They jump into a pit of Devil's Snare. They land in this bizarre kind of viney, plant-like atmosphere, this chamber full of plants. And all of a sudden, the plants start wrapping themselves around them. They all start freaking out. And then we get a bit of a character change from the book to the film. Because in the film, of course, it's Hermione who instantaneously solves this problem. Because she realizes what it is. She realizes how to solve it. But in the book, Ron is the one to kind of give Hermione the idea of what to do. Hermione's freaking out at this moment, has no idea how to solve this, is saying, I wish we had some ability to... I wish we had the ability to create a sun, essentially. She knows that these plants don't grow well with sunlight. They kind of... they love the dark, they love the damp. And she goes, I wish there was a way we could make sunlight. And Ron goes, are you a witch or not? Like, you have the magical skill to do it. Are you going to do it or not? Are we just going to sit here and get swallowed up by this plant? And so finally Hermione uses the spell to get them all out of it. I believe it's Lumos Solem. It is in the film. But it's essentially the Lumos version that causes sunlight. Essentially conjures sunlight, and the plant lets them go. After the plant, they go on to the next chamber. There are a bunch of kind of puzzle chambers here. If you're unfamiliar with the story, in order to get to the stone, they have to pass through the trapdoor, they have to pass through the plant room, the Devil's Snare, and then they find themselves in a chamber which is locked on the far end, and above them are the sound of birds. And they very quickly realize that these birds that are flying around this airy chamber aren't actually birds. They're keys with wings. And in the film, of course, they see the previous tenant of the room, I guess you could say, the previous person to pass through damaged the key, and so it's very easy to find the damaged key. In the book version, it's a little less obvious. They kind of match the lock to a key. Still, as in the film, Harry finds a broomstick and has to show off his Quidditch skills by flying down the key, just like it's a golden snitch. He does so, he grabs the key, he puts it in the lock, they go on to the next chamber. After the bird exhibit, the bird cage, the winged key cage, they find themselves in a chessboard. And this is where we get the excellent interaction in the film. It's kind of become a meme, the "not me, not Hermione, you" scene, where they play wizard's chess. And wizard's chess is something that's kind of been shown throughout the book. One thing I really love about this book is all of these little puzzles kind of have foreshadows throughout the book. And so wizard chess is something that Ron is very good at. It's something that he tries to teach Harry and tries to teach Hermione, and they're nowhere near as good as he is. But he loves chess. So we get to this giant chessboard, and they have to win their way across it to get access to the far door. And as the game progresses, them taking the place of 3 of the pieces on the board, they eventually get to a point in the game where Ron has to sacrifice himself in order for Harry to be able to checkmate the king. And so what happens is Ron sacrifices himself, not to death necessarily, but gets severely injured, knocked unconscious, and they end up winning the game. And so Harry is then allowed to move on. The interesting thing about the film versus the book version is, in the book version, Hermione goes with Harry and leaves an unconscious Ron behind. There are still more chambers to go. So they basically just leave Ron behind and go off together into a new chamber. And there is a chamber, I can't remember if it's before chess with Ron or after. I believe it's after. But we don't see these final 2 chambers in the film. It kind of kills the pacing if you were to do it from a film perspective. But after the chessboard, they find a troll, which has already been knocked out. And so they don't have to deal with the troll. The troll has already been taken care of by whoever was in there before them. And then Harry and Hermione find themselves in a new room, which has a bunch of potions lined up on a table. And it's one of those, it's kind of like Indiana Jones, the Holy Grail scene where he has to solve a riddle in order to find the correct cup. And what happens is, as they enter the chamber, a wall of fire goes up behind them, a wall of fire goes up ahead of them, and in front of them are like 7 potion chalices. And a couple of them are like wine, a couple of them are poison, a couple of them allow them to pass through, and a couple of them allow them to pass back. Not necessarily in that order. There's a big puzzle, and Hermione solves it. It's a lot more enjoyable if you're trying to solve it the first time than trying to read the book. If you're trying to read the book, like I said, it kind of kills the pacing of the mission. But eventually they come to the realization that there is only enough potion to pass through for one of them. And so Hermione makes the decision that this is Harry's quest. Harry has been tasked with taking on the Dark Lord, if that is in fact who has gotten through this far. Harry must go on. It is not for Hermione to deal with. So Harry takes the drink that allows him to pass on. Hermione takes the drink that allows her to go back and then go to Ron, and then they'll escape and go get help, whatever. We don't learn about their journey out. It's probably a very fascinating story as well. But then Harry takes the drink that allows him to pass through the fire to go on into the final chamber. And this is where we get the massive, massive cliffhanger leading into the final chapter, where Harry enters a big room. In the middle of the room is the Mirror of Erised, which was taken from its previous spot. We talked about it earlier in its own chapter. Harry finds the mirror, and standing in front of the mirror is a person. And the interesting thing about this chapter's ending, unlike most cliffhangers nowadays, right? You end the chapter with the reveal, and you kind of hang on it. This chapter, or at least in the American version, I believe it's in the original version too, but the chapter ends without revealing who it is. Now, of course, in my American edition, the left-hand page ends the chapter, and so it says, but it wasn't Snape. Right? The final line is revealing that it's not Snape that's looking at the mirror, but it doesn't tell us who it is. But of course, then I have it on the right page, the start of the next chapter, where it says it was Quirrell. And so that is the major spoiler going into the final chapter of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, is that it's not Snape that's going after the Sorcerer's Stone. It's not even necessarily Voldemort as we think about him. It's Professor Quirrell. And as you reread the book and as you go back and they point out different things, of course it is. It like it's very, very well foreshadowed that Quirrell is the one that is in the wrong, doing the evil essentially. He's the one that is attacking Harry. He is the one that is going after things, setting trolls loose in the school. He has been behind all of the evil things going on in the school the entire time. Snape has just been a very, very well-written red herring. Because yes, Snape hates Harry, and we'll learn about that more in the series, but Snape has also been protecting Harry this whole time. He has his own reasons to hate Harry, but he doesn't want him dead necessarily. And he's been protecting him from Quirrell the entire time, and that is where the confrontations between Snape and Quirrell have occurred, is Snape being defensive of both the castle and of Harry Potter, but Quirrell has always been the one on the offensive. And so we enter chapter 17, the final chapter, called The Man with Two Faces. And this is where we get the reveal that, yes, it has been Quirrell, the one going through the entire book. And so they have this huge confrontation where Quirrell reveals himself. He reveals that he doesn't stutter. That has just been an act that he's been putting on since Harry met him. And then eventually we get the reveal of what is inside Quirrell's turban. And so, if you'll recall, like, earlier in the book, when Harry meets Quirrell the first time, he's still kind of putting on this act of stuttering. But he's not wearing the turban. The turban shows up when Harry meets him back in Hogwarts. And this is when we learn that something happened where Voldemort stopped trusting Quirrell to do his dirty work without keeping an eye on him, right? Because Quirrell failed, we learn, Quirrell failed at retrieving the stone from Gringotts. That was the object that was stolen. Hagrid literally pulled it out of the vault the same day that Quirrell went to steal it. And Voldemort was pissed about it and punished Quirrell by no longer giving him any privacy. And that's when he starts wearing the turban, because Quirrell then reveals what is under the turban, and it is a second face on the back of his head. And this is where we get the chapter title, The Man with Two Faces. Voldemort has been living on the back of Quirrell's head since the beginning of the school year as a punishment for failing to get the stone. He's basically been keeping an eye on him the entire time. And we learn that what happened with Harry's parents, where he tried to kill him and the spell backfired, Voldemort's kind of been living in this ethereal form for years. He was discovered by Quirrell in Albania during his sabbatical that we talked about the previous year. And now he is slowly starting to regain his physical form, mostly by latching onto Quirrell's physical body, which is what we see here. Then Voldemort starts talking to Harry, starts revealing all this to him, and that's when Harry really starts to notice the Mirror of Erised, because for the entire time that Quirrell has been there, waiting for Harry to arrive, because they knew Harry was going to come. This is part of the plan. They've been waiting for Harry to arrive to retrieve the stone, because Quirrell sees himself with it, presenting it to his master. That is his deepest desire, but he cannot possess it. And this is something that we'll talk about later with the conversation with Dumbledore. But they task Harry with retrieving the stone, and he's not really able to do it. But all of a sudden, when he sees himself in the mirror, his reflection pulls it out of his own pocket and puts it back in. And then the physical stone is actually in Harry's pocket. It's kind of this bizarre piece of magic where Harry watches himself do it in the mirror, and it manifests into his own pocket. And Quirrell and Voldemort realize this, and realize Harry has the stone, demand that he gives it to them. Voldemort kind of promises power and eternal glory if he turns it over. Harry refuses. Voldemort starts insulting his parents, saying that they died in vain, died screaming, dying in agony, whatever. And then Quirrell goes to attack Harry. And this is where we get what we see in the film, right? Where he touches Harry, and he starts to fall apart. It is extremely painful for him to touch Harry. And we'll talk about the reasons why later on in the series. But Quirrell is unable to touch Harry, and he basically starts to fall apart. He attacks Harry, and the spirit of Voldemort kind of attacks Harry. It's a little different than it is in the film, but it essentially amounts to Harry coming under attack by the spirit of the Dark Lord and passing out. And he thinks he sees Dumbledore in there somewhere. And then he wakes up, and Dumbledore is standing over him. And they're in the hospital wing. And everything has passed. And everything is fine. Harry starts freaking out. He's like, Dumbledore, they got the stone. Like, Quirrell is evil, whatever. And Dumbledore goes, relax. I know. It's already happened. It's in the past. And then he drops a really funny line where he talks about how it's a huge secret what happened, so naturally the entire school knows about it. And this is where we get that charm of Dumbledore, right? Where he's kind of a mischievous guy. He loves spreading rumors as kind of a joke. He's kind of a kid. He's an adult. He's a kid in an adult's body, essentially. He loves just whimsy and just comedy, and he's a very unique individual, is the best way I can put it. I'm not describing the situation very well, but Dumbledore has these little hints of just very polite comedy in this moment, and talks about how he knew that everything was a fake, a ruse, whatever. He came back, he came to rescue Harry. He's glad he did when he did, because it got a lot worse than he expected it to. But then he reveals to Harry that the stone was never in any danger. Because the stone is only, the mirror was only able to give Harry the stone because it knew that Harry would never use the stone for his own good. And this is where the heart of Harry Potter kind of brings its way into this series. Harry would never do any wrong because that wasn't his intention. Harry's intention was saving the day. It was never to use things to his advantage. And so Dumbledore congratulates him on this, and then they have this cute little interaction after Dumbledore reveals that Voldemort's gone, Quirrell's gone, everything, like, they're dead, don't worry about it, it's fine, don't worry about it, stone's gonna be destroyed, my friend Nicholas is gonna die, whatever. And Harry's like, what? And Dumbledore explains that Nicholas Flamel has been immortal for a very long time, and has been wanting to get rid of the Sorcerer's Stone and his source of immortality for years, and this situation has finally granted him enough motivation to get rid of it, essentially. And so it's kind of a blessing in disguise for a character that we really don't know that much about at all. And so Dumbledore reveals that to Harry, and then they have a cute little interaction about every flavored beans. This is one of those candies, you're probably familiar with them if you're a Harry Potter fan, but it's the every flavor jelly beans that have been mentioned throughout the series. And Dumbledore tries one, and it's earwax. And it's just a fun little scene to end things, Dumbledore being this kind of goofy comedy character, but also an all-wise mentor figure to Harry. And then we go to the feast. Like, the year ends, everybody knows what happened with the stone, essentially. It's kind of a secret, kind of not a secret. The truth has been stretched in many different ways. And then we get the final feast. And this is similar to how it is in the film, where Slytherin's about to win. But all of a sudden, Dumbledore decides to grant House Cup points at the last moment to Gryffindor. And as a Slytherin myself, I must say this is one of the most egregious uses of favoritism in fiction history. You would agree that Dumbledore just decides to give points at the last moment to his favorite house, just to surprise everybody. Let's go change the decorations. It's not like we spent a ton of money on this stuff. Let's just get everybody's hopes up and change the outcome right at the end, right? But Gryffindor is down, I want to say it's 150 points. And, I got to do the math here. I think it's 160 points that they're down from Slytherin. They're in, like, last place. And then Dumbledore gives points to Ron, He gives 50 points to Ron for a really good game of chess, right? And he gives 50 points to Hermione, and for the life of me, I can't remember what exactly he says about Hermione's reasons. Then he gives 60 points to Harry, which have to do with him and his bravery and rescuing the stone, whatever, which puts them tied with Slytherin. And this is when we get the wonderful moment where the hero of the day isn't necessarily Ron or Hermione or even Harry. The final points are awarded to Neville. And he gives Neville 10 points for outstanding bravery in the face of friendship, where he stands up to his friends and he is finally rewarded for it. And Gryffindor wins the House Cup by 10 points. Everybody explodes. It's a wonderful, wonderful ending to this beautiful time at Hogwarts. And Neville basically becomes this little hero. And this is essentially where the book ends. I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing that happens at the end of the chapter. We get a little post scene where they go off into Hogsmeade Station and they take the train back to London, where Harry is picked up by Uncle Vernon. And of course, in the film, we get the excellent scene where he says, I'm not going home, not really, because Hogwarts has become his new home. And as they say their goodbyes in the book, Harry is excited because if Dudley ever tries to play anything on him again, if he ever tries to prank him, Harry has a lot of ways to defend himself, or even threaten to defend himself now. And so he's very excited what the future holds. And this is where the first Harry Potter book ends. And so, with that, thank you guys for making it all the way through all 17 chapters of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Of course, in 2 weeks, we'll pick it up with Chamber of Secrets, but that's really all I have for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Like I said, if you guys are listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, feel free to check out our YouTube channels. They're called Echo Worm and Echo Worm Audiobooks. Worm is spelt with an I. Why? I don't really know. But you can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/EchoWorm. We have plenty of free content there that's not available on YouTube, like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. You can also find that over on Vimeo by searching for us on Vimeo.com. But check us out. Otherwise, stay tuned for more content coming in the future. Again, we try to do this every other Thursday. Join us this Thursday on YouTube at Echo Worm Audiobooks, where we will be talking all questions that you guys have given on the channel. Otherwise, we'll hope to see you very, very soon. Thanks for joining us. See you next Thursday.